Chungo.
Hey, how's it going? Definitely great to see you and wish you were in Santa Fe. We're in day one of the HDHD Spring Fling, which I really didn't promote this year or do a lot because I've just been kind of, on the one hand, working so much on signposts and on things like that that I kind of thought, well, and also I did tell a few people and it was a little bit out there, but it was kind of just, it just rushed. Things have been moving so quick. It's kind of one of those things where I was like, oh yeah, you should send out some more emails and send out some reminders. But here we are. James has come, which is I think you're our out of towner of the year. And in some sense, you also set the timing of the spring fling, or we talked about it. We're like, let's just do mid March, and then you said, I'm gonna get tickets. Let's just do it. Let's make it.
Yeah, you told me to get the dates, and
Yeah.
I'm like, this is when I can be there because that's when it's going
It
to
was
be.
perfect. I think we both arrived at the same dates. People always ask me, do you look at the gates to choose the dates for the conference and things like that? And I look at it after because a lot of times I just can't. This time we had to do it. I had the choice of doing early September or later September. And I just knew. I mean, I do think about the time in the wheel, like later September is a mellower time of year for the conference this year. But for this, in this case, I think it was just mid March was just. It's something about like spring is in the air. People have woken up.
Sure.
They're kind of just
Getting ready to.
or they get. I think people are pretty much back in the world a little. I mean, it feels that way. It feels like
After daylight savings time, spring equinox is
yeah,
just around
daylight
the
savings
corner,
time.
so it's like
Yeah, we have off screen here is there's Amber. So yeah, absolutely. So spring equinox, things like that, and then daylight savings time just happened. So now we have all that sun.
And you get to end it with St. Patrick's Day.
That's true. That's
I mean, it's like
which
a party,
happened to
right?
be the final day.
I know. I thought that was right.
Which I know is usually a 5-1 or a fifth line on the left angle cross of the plane. Usually, yeah, it's gate 36, line 5. So I do end up looking at the gates and stuff later. I mean, but yeah, it's been a fun kickoff. We had a little pre kickoff last night where you flew in, and it's always like that. Whether it's for the spring fling or we also did a winter respite. We've been doing those for a few years, and then of course the big one, the main event. It's always fun to have those pre-events. And so last night, you ended up getting some sleep, but
Yeah.
I went to pick up my sister with James Alexander and my buddy Johnny, and then we took my sister Emma out in the town in Albuquerque. We took her to Anodyne. And
oh,
took her
nice.
to Founders, although they were just
Cool.
closing up, but she got to kind of see it. Yeah. Do you know Founders? You been to
I
Founders?
do, yeah. I
These
do
are
know
just-
Founders.
these are
Yeah,
just
it's a
like
cool spot.
local- Yeah, it's a great little.
Yeah.
It's a great spot.
Anodyne too is like classic Albuquerque.
Yeah. For those who don't know, Albuquerque is a really funky city that's kind of like permanently in the 90s somehow. I don't know how to explain it. It's just this interesting,
Good description.
like, it reminds me of Seattle in the 90s, but it also kind of reminds me of a lot of places in the 90s. Like, I don't know, it just has this feeling of, it's really like punky music, but also pretty unassuming. And I don't know how to explain it. I do jokingly say that it's like From Dusk Till Dawn, that movie. If you've seen From Dusk Till Dawn, where everyone's dressed in black and they're all kind of goth. It's kind of goth vampires.
It's a little gothy there, yeah.
Yeah, cool goth vampires.
The spot you sent us to get food was pretty wild. There was
Where
the
was-
Mexican spot. You walk in, and the kitchen is like you could cater.
El Modelo.
Yeah,
El
I
Modelo,
couldn't believe how
okay.
big the kitchen
Yeah.
was, and it was like people were just in lines. It's almost like factory style.
yeah,
You just
I
ordering
know.
your food and just stand
So
there.
good. Oh,
Yeah,
my
it was
God.
really good.
El Modelo is incredible, yeah, for those who don't know. Well, so we could talk about, this is pretty much just an open session, and I'd love to get your thoughts, Peter, on any of these topics that basically we can just kind of I had two thoughts for this. One is I'd like to share a little bit about the system of Dr. Eleanor Haspel-Portner, because she is an under-researched, who I think has done actually vast work in human design researcher, probably the most academically astute and academically oriented, scientifically validation oriented approach to human design. And so, do you know about her? I should ask maybe, have you encountered her work and have you tried any of her? She has other calculations of the body graph that are interesting as well, and she actually does multidimensional chart analysis.
I've only dabbled, I guess you could say. I've had access to a bunch of her texts, and they're very powerful. It sounded like in the around 2000, it sounded like Ra was investing a lot of time and energy working with her, and I think her husband too, in developing the Rave Life Sciences um,
Absolutely. She did a lot of human
program.
design and dream rave work, and she really urged. I mean, I guess here's a few of the takeaways from my conversation. First of all, I we only scratched the surface. I cannot wait to continue having conversations with her and to continue studying her work. I definitely want to read all of her books. I want to now. She's telling me about some things that she's working on, and I'm going to be the first one to buy her new books when they come out because really just such a treat for us as human design analysts to have someone who is so devoted to scholarly research in what is exactly our field of study. And her way of presenting is just very analytical and very clear. And so that's one of the takeaways. But as far as the actual modes of analysis, she uses additional calculations or extra imprints, and they're really, really fascinating. She has very good reasons for using them. And then the question becomes, how do you interpret them? And she has very interesting ways of interpreting these extra levels. So we already have a pattern for this in human design we have basically one pattern for it. The difference between the design, when you look at your sleeping, your dream rave, versus your body graph. And your design of your body graph is 88 degrees retrograde of the sun, so around 3 months before, or around the third trimester, the beginning of the third trimester of pregnancy. That's the design date. But then your dream rave design date is around a week before, 6 days, something like that, because it's 88 degrees retrograde of the moon. It's the lunar form. In this lunar form, first of all, a key takeaway, you can interpret this lunar date not just with the 15-centered matrix, which is our dream matrix, our 5-centered kind of body, but you can also look at it with all 64 gates. Why? Because this is a meaningful imprint of those gates that you experienced a week before birth, basically, that had some impression on your emotional body or your somatic body, maybe. I'm not exactly sure. I don't want to misspeak, so I will just say, with extreme respect for Dr. Haspel-Portner's work, please check it out on your own so I don't misinterpret what the different levels are, because I know that there's an emotional, there's a mental, a physical, and a spiritual. These pretty much correlate to Jung's four-function model of the thinking, feeling, sensing, and intuitive, or I mean, there's not entirely, but it's basically these four levels that she looks at. So already we have what is the personality, which is the time of birth, with the design, which is 3 months before birth, or the time of the beginning of the third trimester, roughly. Now, there's an interesting move that she does. She says already life development and she has a real cool background in social sciences and like psychological development, early childhood development, things like that. So there's already what is studied is called the fourth trimester. The fourth trimester is after birth to about 3 months, basically a Mercury cycle, 88 degrees again of the sun, or around 88 days after birth. And so it's funny because I'm a 5-1. Well, I always was thinking how funny it is to play the game where my first line is actually the personality of someone else, and my personality is the design of someone else. So it's almost like I'm their personified unconscious, and like, hey, how's it going? I'm a part of you that you don't really know, that you have inside of you, that I like this and this and I do that kind of thing. And and I always thought it's a fun game to play, like jump from the personality to design. Well, that's exactly what she does. I'm a 5-1. Well, there's a 2-5 or a 3-5 that's 88 degrees after the point that I was born, right? And so
Right.
that is the really interesting move that she makes, and a move that I think is worth researching. And so what she basically has discovered, and this is what she presented to Ra, which I think was the beginning of the end between them. I will let her speak to that because I don't want to put any words in her mouth in that. I know people he was a manifester. He separated from everyone he worked with. He would work with people and then he would separate from them, right? It was rare for him to have these long-term people he didn't separate from, although there were a few. But in any case, she continued her work with her husband, and they did incredible work, and she really approached it with a very scholarly, scientific approach. She used the work of Dr. Rodin, who is also Lois Rodin was a astrologer, science, kind of data science person who tagged 30,000. Well, she's the creator of the Rodin rating, like something that's an AA rated chart is something you have to have a birth certificate to actually validate that. And then she tagged 30,000 charts, and she tagged them with all sorts of data about the people, like this was an athlete and they're in the top 1% of their profession, and this is a musician and a singer, top 1% of their profession, and so on. And then she could find correlations. She wanted to find, like, hey, what Mars conjunct descendant, are these people more athletic? Mars Aries, are these people more athletic? Things like that. And she could query this data set of 30,000. So Dr. Haspel-Portner did the same thing with human design. And she looked at what could she validate in human design or not through this 30,000 set of data. She worked with Eric Memmert, who developed neutrinos for Windows. So, and there actually is a Noble Life Sciences, which is the kind of business that she founded, app that you can run that will generate these other charts for you. But really, here's what she discovered, and then the question comes how to interpret it. And she's spent really the last 20 years discovering interesting, nuanced ways of interpreting it that I really can't do justice to. But I'll just kind of open up this field for those who are interested. So what Eleanor Haspel-Portner's discovered is that there's kind of a mirror image with your birth date mirroring out in both directions. And when I say mirroring out, what she's basically discovered is just like it's highly significant your design date, and that design date is what causes activation in the body graph in the conventional sense that we understand and already have meaning for, there's also the mirror image of that to which you are the design date. There's 88 degrees of the sun after you were born. And that gives you basically almost a composite or some integration. She calls that the integration one because it takes that long for you to fully integrate all these different levels. She basically splits into the levels of the emotional, physical, mental, and there's an order. First it's emotional, and then it's mental, and then it's physical. It's kind of like the order of the elements where you start with the fiery emotion, and then you cool off with the mental, and then you make it or like the hearts to the spade, or to the clubs to the diamonds, all that, or spring, summer to fall, and so anyway, she has a very interesting approach to it, which is really dividing things into these 4 levels. And so we haven't really yet looked at those 4. I guess I'll just say at this point right now, looking at that mirror image, it's already an interesting idea. And then the question, how do we interpret it? Because it's not causing activation at the level that we study in human design. But she's basically saying there are 3 other levels that we don't study in human design. We are only studying 1 level. And she actually, interestingly, I was saying, so is that the physical level? She actually says, no, it's the mental level. That she believes that the personality and the design are actually the mental, that the 3rd trimester is when the mentation, the mental faculties come online for the fetus, and that is the imprinting for what is actually the fundamental mental construct, which makes sense because it's conscious and unconscious at some level. And sure, the unconscious relates to the body and relates to the physical, but it's different to relate to the physical, right? She actually said something interesting to me. She said, well, you have a wide open solar plexus, looking at my, normal body graph. So, but I also don't have a lot of activation in the spleen. And then she looked at the different levels, and it remained, for the most part, open. That's what she'll do, is she'll look at these different charts at different key times in the 3 months leading up to birth and the 3 months after birth. And I can tell you what those key times are in a moment. I just don't want to move too quickly here because I think it's just interesting, the approach. And looking at these key moments, she's not really, as far as I know, I don't want to put words in her mouth, saying that your aura changes as much as she's saying these are explanations because there's almost like 4 levels of the aura. There's like the mental aura and the emotional aura and the physical aura and the spiritual aura, or something like that. And again, I don't want to put words in her mouth, but it's as if there are these 4 levels that we can actually study. And so far, we haven't really, we've slightly broken into a second level with the dream rave. That is our like foray into two of the 4 levels. So what she basically looks at is, she looks at the personality with 88 degrees before birth. That is what we normally would look at. That's actually the mental level. She looks at the dream rave that we look at, which is some kind of research that she actually did. Ra kind of tasked her with doing dream rave, research and going down that path. And she found, when you do the chart with the 88 degrees before the moon, it is really interesting. You are actually looking at this imprinting that occurs just 6 days shy of birth, really. And then she looks at 6 days after of birth, and she looks at 3 months after of birth, and then she looks at 2 more times, and those 2 more times are subtle imprintings, and they basically work out to around 5 hours before birth, around an hour before birth, around an hour after birth, and around 5 hours after birth. And so there are key things that happen at those kind of lead up as well. There's the, I forget the term, but there's basically the Brixton, what's the thing that happens? There's certain things that basically occur to trigger pregnancy, and they occur right before pregnancy, and then there's certain points after pregnancy that the baby kind of comes online in certain ways. And so there really is this lead up to the birth and kind of echo on either side. And what they work out to is not 88 degrees, but 88 minutes, which is a subdivision of a degree. And you actually go 88 solar minutes or 88 lunar minutes. So the first 2 charts are 88 solar degrees and 88 lunar degrees, and then the second 2 charts are 88 solar minutes, 88 lunar minutes. And what those do are, they basically are the 5 hours before, that's the solar minutes, 88 solar minutes before, because it's not a minute as we know it. This is in the degrees, minutes, seconds system.
Right.
It's called. Yeah. So anyway, I'd like to open that up for discussion. What people think. I mean, it's a pretty. I mean, obviously, we can't really comment without looking at our own body graphs and then trying to make sense of them. And it is kind of a struggle because I did. But then I started to get a sense because she walked me through my own body graph. And so here's a couple of my key takeaways. One is that I really loved her approach to using all 64 gates for a person. So, do you have gate 1?
I don't.
Okay, I don't either. Okay. Well, I happen to have had gate 1 at one of these charts, at one of these imprints. And that is about my creative contribution. I guess 8 is contribution, but 1 is the creativity that is then contributed. And so I think that chart might have been the spiritual chart. I don't want to misspeak, but say it was the spiritual chart. You could interpret that then just at a very simple level of deconstructing that as part of my relation to gate 1. Anytime I have it activated, anytime I'm around people who have it, anytime a transit has it, anything, somehow my body remembers that imprint and connects it to the spiritual level, or that the spiritual level is part of my contribution or part of my creativity and my expression. That's how I connect to the spiritual, because that's in my spirit chart. So you get a physical chart, a mental chart, an emotional chart, a spirit chart. And so because that's in the spirit chart, now my spirit chart also defined head ajna. Doesn't mean I have a defined head ajna. I might not have the energy to think through any of this stuff or solve any of it, but it does mean when a transit comes along, someone hooks me up, what layer of my multidimensional body lights up? My spiritual body. Interestingly, right? So you can have a very mental, emotional system, or a very emotional, spiritual system, or a very spiritual, physical system, or like it gives you this way to kind of overlap different parts of yourself where it's like, yeah, you don't have that, you're right. But then when it lights up, something is imprinted in you that because when you were 3 months old, and the 3 months old is a really interesting one because that actually is very important. That one is almost as important as the design. Because personality is obviously the most important in some sense, most, I don't want to, put it in a quantity, but it's very significant because it's right in the middle of these, so that's the time of birth. But then, just like 3 months before, 88 degrees before, gives us the human design system, so too 88 degrees after gives you this integration. And so what happens then is like, for me, my integration, or it could have been actually my combination. There's two. There's one that's the three. I don't want to misspeak, but there's some, like, say you have a defined solar plexus in that, undefined otherwise. Well, yeah, it's not going to change whether your solar plexus is defined, but it might give you, like, if it's a combination of all four levels, it might mean that when your solar plexus is activated, you're affected spiritually, you're learning spiritual lessons in this life, you're affected intellectually, and you're understanding all sorts of new concepts and learning all sorts of psychology and analytical stuff. You're affected physically, and you're like losing or gaining weight or getting in shape or this or that or who knows what, right? And you're affected basically on all levels, at the emotional level, of course, because so it's kind of like the solar plexus can affect you at all levels if it's there in your integration chart. On the other hand, you might have defined solar plexus, not there not 3 months after you were born, there was no solar plexus activation. Then for you, even though you have a defined solar plexus, it's not the fundamental motor of your growth and development spiritually, or maybe it's only in the spirit chart. It is the fundamental, it is where you're learning life lessons, but it's not in some other way. So it was just like a really interesting way of slicing it, where it almost reminds me of what they do with perfections in Hellenistic astrology, where it's like you have a big transit, but it's only really important if the ruler for that year for you relates to that.
It's like eclipses, yeah.
Yes,
like they don't affect you in the same way if you don't
it
have
doesn't
like
affect you
things in
unless
that
it's
chart, in that sign
yeah,
or whatever.
Yeah, exactly.
It reminds me almost. I think Peter, you could see this too. It almost the triplicity of the three sheaths with the physical, spiritual, mental bodies. You know, she's got a fourth in there, a spirit body, but it's very much like she's almost analyzing where are you at in your emotional body, where are you at in your mental body. You know, when I think of Theosophy and
well, I said that same thing. I said that in Theosophy, the astral is kind of the conflation of the emotional and spiritual, and I didn't really have chance to go into it, but I would have gone on to say that Ra, in his Black Book, and early on talked about the emotional center, the solar plexus, as the spiritual center in the development of spirit awareness and spiritual awareness. We have gate 55 there, undergoing mutation, and that is a gate of spirit that does kind of connect it. It's like the awareness that relates to the spirit, the awareness center of the spirit. How is your spirit doing? Is your spirit in despair? Is it in pain? Is it in hope? And so on. But I didn't really have a chance to go into that with her. But yeah, I do think her fourfold division and the problem of the 3 and the 4, I mean, there is some conflation in all of these systems, like, is the emotional the same as the spiritual? Well, maybe it was for Ra, because maybe that was his polarity, and he sort of had, I've been doing a lot of personality type research, and he's more of a sensing, thinking person, and so he's more of a mental, physical person, and then he has this polarity away from the, he always had rejected the spiritual before it kind of hit him on the head,
right,
and he couldn't, and same with the feeling world, I would say, so maybe part of that, but I do see that as just also, he had to deliver. We needed somebody like that to deliver human design because he was so effective and efficient in the sensory thinking world. And I do think that human design works so well that you might ask, why do we need extra layers? Well, you can ask yourself if you need it, but I think people who've been in human design for a very long time, who aren't in any danger of being overwhelmed by too much information or confused and thinking, misinterpreting it this way or that way, if you're not really having that problem, then actually what you see is it's an incredible blessing and a gift to all of us for our field to have our own scientists, to have our own Niels Bohrs, and have our own, you know what I mean? It's like there are people who actually do care enough to really deeply research and ask difficult, penetrating questions with these things. So that was one takeaway, was just, you could look at any gate, and there's a lot of gates that I just don't feel I have a relationship to or think I have a relationship to. And I mean, I do have a relationship. We have a relationship to every gate. So when I think of gate 1, I don't have it in my body graph. So I'm like, I never really developed a relationship to it. I developed a relationship to my hanging 12 because I know when a 22 comes along, right? But I didn't develop a relationship to the 1 because I don't have that, it's just not in my, I don't have the 8 either. So, but she kind of gave me a relationship to that. So that was one takeaway, like developing a relationship to each and every gate. Even if you don't have it in your body graph, even if you don't have that channel, you have a relationship to it. Every now and then, that part of your life will kind of go into it. And it is like asking, what part of somebody's life. So it's just kind of like, it's an interesting thing. It's like, where is that energy being directed? Which of the 4 modes of expression? We can express things in feeling, which is also through relationship and friendship and family and love. It's basically, there's a French philosopher, Alain Badiou, and he has 4 regimes of truth. And what he says is, they can't convert to each other. So what's true or false in one, you can't really argue at another level. People get confused. Scientific truth, the very obvious one, is the truth or false of formula. If the formula predicts the outcome successfully, then it is true. And if the formula fails to predict it, then it is false. And it's a very easy one to check, because you can run that formula and it'll either work or it won't. But the truth of love, of true love, nobody can prove that with a formula. There's true love, and the truth of love is basically, he actually says psychology is the study of the truth of love. And to study what people truly love, because it's getting them in touch, what they pretend they love, what they pretend they don't love, they pretend to be this, they pretend to be that, they're stuck in situations they hate and they're not being true with themselves, and they go to therapy and then they get really honest, and what do they truly love in life? So that's a totally different thing. You're not going to find that. Then there's two other regimes. There's the regime of politics. True oppression cannot be proven, as much as the Marxists and people love to try to scientifically prove something could be oppressive or not, or prove fairness. This is like the tribal level in a way. You can't really prove the political, which I would say is more like the physical in our kind of connections. And then I believe the last is the truth of art and aesthetics. So he has the truth of basically what is truly good art.
Beauty.
And basically the truth of beauty. And that also involves, it's kind of a corollary to the art to ethics. So basically, those are his regimes of truth. I mean, there's a lot of different ways to split it up, but it's kind of just like saying that there's these 4 different levels to every person's life. There's what is the personality crystal learning as a passenger? That's the spiritual level, because that's the level that's kind of just what will it possibly keep with it in the next life or something? Who knows? How it filtered those neutrinos, what decisions it made. But what is it learning, basically? What is its mental? And interestingly, that's the one that she says is the human design body graph. And I'd love to open that up for discussion, because it's such an interesting question. I said, isn't that the physical? And she said, no, it's the conscious and the unconscious.
Well, I remember when the argument between Gene Keys and human design was coming up with in my world, and I studied Gene Keys just a little bit, and then I was doing my human design stuff, and I felt immediately, I said, oh, human design is the mental version, where I felt Gene Keys is the heart-based version. I felt like he sank more into a heart-based feeling, maybe emotional, I could call it. But I definitely said human design is the mental astute human being who loves intelligence. This is your system.
Well, and any division of personality typology usually starts, whether it's Enneagram with division of head, heart, and gut, which is kind of like physical, mental, and emotional, or with its Jungian personality with thinking versus feeling, and then intuition versus sensing. So, I mean, whether you use 3 or you use 4, I definitely think this kind of research into these extra body graphs is like extremely interesting. It's like the real question: how do we interpret this? How do we see?
Like the idea of it though is like using those other gates, like those not traditional body graph activations. You can experience. I think like what she's getting at maybe is like a way for her to explain the differences in people who don't have the same gate defined, right? And so if you have it, say, defined, and because the dates and the timings in a spiritual way, and I have it in a mental way, our experiences of that gate, even though we both don't have it defined and we have different charts, it's a way to get at that from the underside, and to have it be more than just an impression or an idea or something like that. It's a way to technically say, this is why you experience it this way, and this is why this person experiences it this way. So I think it's exciting that the work that she's doing. I mean, this is the first time hearing about it, so I'd like to learn more about it for sure.
Yeah, thank you so much, Amber. Loved that.
Another really interesting thing, just real quick, listening to this Talks of Raw, I think it was in the Channeled by Type or so, he just said, which was really interesting, he was talking about you have 2, right? And he goes, but actually 4 is what creates life, he says. It's the number 4. He said the wheels connected into 4, and he was explaining how it was all separate into 4.
Well, we have 4 bases, and then the life is like the 5th base.
But this is what he just said first, and we usually would do 2, right? But you're saying, no, there's 4, and this is what she's saying. It's like, that's funny, he just said that on that thing this morning.
Yeah, no, I love this kind of research, and I think that, Amber put it
What's
really
Peter
well.
think?
Yeah, I love to hear it.
What's our Colorado cat think?
I mean, I could say a handful of things. I mean, one, it just it emphasizes the point that there's so much going on that our mind has no access to, like you're saying. And so, well, one, I have a statement, and one's kind of a question in regards to that statement. One is, it all just emphasizes the importance of following strategy and authority, and but before I ask the question about that, it makes me, I really like what you were saying about how there might be other gates that play other roles in these other ways, other charts. It makes me think, what other gates do I feel drawn to? What other gates show up in my life a lot?
Does change through time if you're looking at it from like if you're in a more spiritual place, do those gates that trigger you, that you're drawn to, do they change if you're in a more physical space? Like over your lifetime, like how does that change?
Yeah, and then there's also the interesting question of the composite, where here's one for me. I've had a mystery, which is I have a few points. Some of them are not totally mystery because nodes. My nodes are in 12-3 and 12 on the design side, and in 11-3. I've had so many 11-2s and 11-3s and 12-2s and 12-3s and sometimes 12-4s in my life. So many of those crosses of Eden. And then I've also had so many 36-6s, which is the other part of that cross of Eden. So I've had long-term partners who how I was joking about that game earlier, how you play the personality design game. Well, I'd have a partner who's a 4-6, and then I'd have another partner a year later who's a 2-4, but that 4th line was the 4th line of the 4-6. It's like these interesting kind of things, and that's in that same 2-4, 4-6. That's in this same little thing, and a lot of them. I also have had a lot of 35-36s, and a lot of people with 36-6 in my life, and that polarity, and then a lot of 36 line 4s and line 5s. Oh wait, which one do you have? Which one do you have?
36-2.
And is that's
and then I also have 11-4 and 11.
And that's in your incarnation house, right? Yeah. So that's one example of like, I don't know, like I've had, like when I say girlfriend of 4 years who was born March 17th, actually her birthday this weekend, 36 line 5, 5-1, cross of the plane, and then I had another partner who's 36-5, March 17th, and I had a partner who's March 16th, also line 5. On 36, and then I just had like one. So I mean,
so did she say? Did she say for you like where 36 or 11 and 12 are?
I noticed it. It's in my integration or it's in my combination. So the interesting thing is, here's the interesting body graphs that you basically look up. You look up these calculations of 88 degrees before, 88 degrees after, sun. Same thing for moon. 88 degrees before, 88 degrees after. Then sun, moon again, but do it with minutes. 88 minutes before. Not time minutes. It actually works out to about 5 hours, but minutes moving of the basically
around the circular body.
Exactly. And then
which should translate to about 16 gates, correct? I think that's about 16 gates.
It's pretty cool. I mean,
did you see the thumb up on your screen? That was crazy.
Oh, what was the thumbs up on my screen?
Like you said 16 gates, and this thumbs up thing came up like somebody was saying, yeah, that's right.
Oh, good. Okay, I think it shows reaction. The 16 gates are those, well, because you have these different, I don't know how many different gates you actually get for the sun, because again, the minutes ones you're so close that I guess for some people they will change if you were born right at the very beginning or end of a gate. It's really an interesting question, but yeah, sorry, I got a little bit sidetracked there, but as far as my 36-6 polarity and my draw to that, and all the people in my life who also had 36-35, and I also had like my first boss was gate 12, line 3, and I was in a band with a gate 12, line 3. These are personality sun people, and I've had a good friend who was a 12 too, and partners. I mean, just on and on and on and on. And so some of that is nodal. I have 12-3 in my
okay,
notes.
so it's
but I don't have 35 or 36. And I completely undefined solar plexus, and I was like, why is it just the nodes? Is it just that these happen to be with the nodes? Well, no. I have 36. I have 35, 36 in the combination body graph, which is that at one of them I'm like 35 physical and 36 mental, or 35 emotional and 36 spirit, however it works. But it doesn't mean that I have that channel, but it did give me some interesting thing of like, wow, when that is activated and when I am around people who have that kind of chemical cocktail, it is kind of doing something for me. It is basically a very early part of my life. It actually could have been, you know what? There's a combination and there's a integration, and I have to check. It could have been in the integration, which is the one that would mean that basically 3 months after my birth, 35, 36 was in the transit. So in that case, it actually would fire on all cylinders, and that's the most impactful.
Okay.
But if it's a combination, I don't think it might be less impactful, because then you're just basically picking and choosing from one and another layer, if you will. But all of this is it reminds me of something that evolutionary astrologers do. And we were actually just talking about, I mentioned at least Dane Rudyard, who's kind of an early precursor to the evolutionary astrologers, who was part of the Transcendental Painting Group based here in Santa Fe in the 1920s.
Such cool work.
Really cool.
Oh God, I love that work.
Really cool people.
Transcendental painters are just the coolest. Yeah.
He needs to get down to the, he can see some of their work.
At the museum?
At Vladimir. Oh, I was
in Albuquerque's great as well.
They used to have it. They had an exhibit there for a while. It's
you
probably
have the book on it. I've seen a coffee table book on it. It's so good. Okay, well, anyway, but what it reminded me of was the way evolutionary astrologers will basically look. So they do some really interesting things. Like, here's just one example for those who don't know evolutionary astrology. You might look at when Mercury conjuncts one planet, and then the next time it conjuncts the next planet. And you'll look at its conjuncts of the planet because it's delivering information from that to that. So it might deliver information from Saturn to Pluto through conjuncting Saturn and then conjuncting Pluto. And you'll do these really interesting analyses. And then the other thing you'll do is you'll look at the planetary cycles for a person's life, and you'll look at what happened in their life. And the biggest one of the biggest is Saturn. You also look at Uranus, which they associate with trauma, which is a really interesting keynote from evolutionary astrology. But that's your trauma signature in a way, is your something shocking that happened to you. But anyway, the Saturn, it can be a lot of hardship and grief and loss and difficulty. And they look at the Saturn quarter, which is 7 years. But then you also look at the Saturn semi-square, which is 3.5 years, and you basically look at when you were 3.5 years old and you were 7 years old, then you can kind of zoom out when you were 14 and when you were 21, and you're doing these Saturn kind of analyses, but you also look at the interesting planetary relationships to each other. So it just kind of, that's obviously the more macro level of just looking at different key points in your life, but this is really just saying those first 3 months of your life, you're so impressionable that of course the transits keep affecting you. What if you're born without a defined sacral and then the next 3 months it's defined? Like, that's at least interesting information to know. Yeah. So I don't think that I would tell somebody who's coming to me for the very first time for human design, what is human design? Yeah. I don't know that I would go into this. What I would do, though, if people are coming into human design, they say, look, I'm already in pretty advanced human design. I want to understand why I just am curious even. Then I would say, maybe their innocence motivation or something, then I would say, okay, I almost just want to build a tool that lets people really easily browse the transits of the 3 months to the 3 months. Because something that Eleanor Haspel-Portner said that was really interesting is that if you take that 3 months before birth and 3 months after birth, and you look at the Sun-Earth polarity, the Sun-Earth have moved through all 64 gates. Because they're a polarity, so it only takes 6 months to cover. So it's really the 3 months before and the 3 months after that you are kind of getting the first ever imprinting and experience of all 64 gates by the sun of the earth.
That's wild.
It's kind of a cool thing to think about. And even just to look at what your half of the wheel is, because everyone owns a half of the wheel. And that half of the wheel is basically with them right in the middle, the 3 months before and the 3 months after. And you can kind of draw and highlight those gates and show what your half of the wheel is. Mine is the right half of the wheel. because I have gate 10 on one end, and then I have gate 52 on the other.
3 months after it would be.
Okay,
Would you calculate 88 days from your birthday?
Well, it's 88 degrees of the sun. It's not just 88 days. I learned this doing the computer programming using. It's not as simple as that.
Okay.
What you could do if you want to do it yourself is you could go on astro.com, which is a free astrology website, run your birth chart, and then look at the exact degree of your sun. Like my sun is at 2 degrees, and it's even at 2 minutes, and I'm not even kidding, 2 seconds. It's a 222. But it's like, you can look, but yours might be 28, 32, 46 or something. But you basically get your number, and you find your degrees, minutes, seconds, and then you look, and you start maybe 88 days, and you basically search and increment or decrement
Until
the time until you get exactly 88 days, even down to the minute and the second. So if it is some minutes and seconds, make sure they're the same minutes and seconds, and just kind of keep adjusting the time. That will be the exact time, that 88 degrees of the sun. You can do the same.
Well, here's something I'm looking at here as I'm looking at my chart, because 88 degrees does translate as 16 gates.
Nice. That's what you were saying earlier about the 16 gates. Yeah, that's so interesting. It's like
and what I was just kind of looking, but it also depends if it's left angle, it's 17 gates. If it's
right, because if it's
between 15 and 17,
90 degrees. So 16 gates, if you take the very beginning of one gate and then it goes 16 gates away, that's exactly 90. It's just that 88 happens to fall in 16, 16, 16, 16, 16, and then it goes, really it should be 15 one way and I guess 17 the other. So it kind of depends.
Exactly. So with that, knowing it's with our limited understanding of what this system is, I just for fun was kind of looking at my 88 degrees. I mean, 16 gates is going to be, well, I'm a right angle, so that is my design Earth. The 30, I'm a 59, 16 gates around the wheel is the 34, which is my design Earth.
Makes perfect sense.
But what I was looking at here is when I look at my 4 gates of my incarnation cross, if I look at the one before and the one after, like what I see is like, so on both sides of my 59 is the 29 and 40. On both sides of the 34 is the 14 and 9. Both sides of my 55 is the 30 and the 37, and both sides of my 20 is 8 and the 16. So what I see there is around my sleeping phoenix cross is the cross of contagion and the cross of planning. And my Uranus opposition was in the cross of planning. My Chiron return is in the cross of contagion.
Oh, wow. Well, that is really, that's
now we need to run something else to see if that works for the next person.
Well, the thing
whatever that means.
It's not a consistent pattern like that, though.
No.
It really isn't, because of retrogrades and because of the asymmetrical cycles and so on. That's a really cool and interesting thing, because what we're basically saying is, where are the sun and the earth when in your case, I guess you're saying Chiron and then also Uranus, when those are in particular places in the sky. Well, both of those are highly asymmetrical. And because they're so asymmetrical, they appear to us to slow down and even go retrograde, and then they go stationary and go direct, and they speed up. But they move in such different speeds, and and what causes that is that we're on the ecliptic, and then they're perpendicular to the ecliptic. So especially Chiron, which is between Mars and Jupiter, it's like really perpendicular. So some people can have like a Chiron opposition a few years later, others it can be 20 years or something, right? It really depends where you are on this, because it's so perpendicular to how we're experiencing it from our plane. So it's a really interesting thing. It's how the planes intersect. But yeah, I would just say because of that, it is completely random. I mean, not random, but it's at least arbitrary, or it's really just it's completely contingent on the speeds and various factors of those planets, and not on the sun, Earth themselves. It's kind of, we're just looking where the sun, Earth happen to be when those planets are moving, are in those places.
So, question to Peter: are any of those gates the ones that you've been drawn to before?
Any of the gates of the Chiron or
Of the out of that making that 3 month or that 3 month time frame, that calculation, are any of those the gates you've been interested in the past? Because maybe they are in.
But what we'd have to do, we haven't checked for his body graph yet. We have to check 3 months after. That would be, I guess, the first interesting.
I think he did.
That's what he was saying.
Oh,
He
you
did. Yeah.
Oh, you did.
Yeah, he's over there running.
You were able to
Yeah,
find
he's
it.
running
Okay.
it. That's why I was wondering if that was the gate if any of those gates were ones that you have been drawn to in the past.
Okay, well.
Well, I have a lot of there's a handful of crosses I tend to attract, and cross of planning, cross of contagion, and cross of penetration are probably the 3 that show up in my life the most.
Interesting. Okay.
So
That is really interesting.
So maybe they are part of his spiritual.
And so you've run
side
a chart now. You found the time 88 degrees after, roughly 88 days. But what you want to do is make sure then that the design calculation of that is exactly your personality calculation down to the base. See what I'm saying? You can get really precise with it because that design calculation should have the color, tone, base all the way down because 88 degrees before was your time of birth. So yeah.
Yeah, so you can basically run a chart, you can look at your design date, and then you can plug that in as the birth date.
Well, that would also be interesting for somebody else, but what is actually the inverse, I guess. It's like if you could create a design date chart. Well, no, because then you're going further back in time. You're starting your person
3 months after.
So what would actually happen? The way to do it would be cool if you could punch in a design date and say, "Show me the personality for this design date. Show me the reverse of what we normally do." Normally, I say, "I'm born here. Show me 88 degrees before." What I want is, "I'm born here. Show me 88 degrees after." And in fact, this is what exists with Neutrino for Windows plugin for multidimensional human design analysis and so on. But I don't think it exists on the web yet. I imagine that it might be something that's in progress, and I would definitely be excited to use that. Now, as a programmer, I can kind of build that myself, so maybe I'll experiment a little bit. I'll wait till I get a better grasp on the system and so on. But in the meantime, if you're curious yourself, you can actually just go to Noble Life Sciences, go to Dr. Eleanor Haspel-Portner's website and get your free report, and she will send you all of them in your email. And I definitely recommend it because it's totally free and doesn't hurt anything. And you'll get her newsletter, which is pretty cool. I enjoy reading her newsletter and keep up to date with what she's doing. So, yeah, it's just kind of cool that we have our very own data science person interested in human design enough to really devote a lifetime to research and study of this. And she's done some other interesting research as well. I definitely want to do a series on her work as I better understand it. One of the really cool ones was just how persistent she was with Ra about Tarot, because she had such a background in a kind of a greater milieu of mystical study, and so she was really persistent with him, even though he would kind of, oh, no. And she said, well, didn't the voice say anything? And of course it had. I mean, he actually mentioned that it did.
Oh, okay.
It did actually talk about Tarot. He said that the 2 things he didn't really integrate were the runes and Tarot. And all I really got from Ra about the runes were that there's a fundamental set of glyphs, kind of like base glyphs, that are the basis of all language, so that all words have the same root, all letters, all alphabets have the same root. Like, I don't know, like some divine language thing. That's the one, all I really got of that part of it. But the Tarot part, Ross said that the voice actually said that had to do with incarnation sequencing, and it was a sequence, basically, that it was sequencing or telling you not just the order of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, but maybe there were a number of different sequences. And in fact, this is what you find with the cards from the Magi, with what are called, you do quaternations, or what are they called? Basically, you perform a certain quaternation, or I'm kind of missing the word, but on the cards, and quadration. That's what you perform quadrations on the cards, and you split them into 4, and you basically split them into piles of 3, 3, 3, 3, and so on. And you do these quadrations, and you end up with these really amazing, really interesting sequences that all are very much. Bless you. That are all very much, for those who are number theory people, they have a lot to do with this thing that number theorists love that they nicknamed the fingerprint of God, because it's basically like 175824 or something like that, and it keeps repeating. It's if you divide seven. If you get into like dividing sevens, you get this number endlessly repeating. But it creates this really beautiful shape, and basically you see this thumbprint throughout these sequences doing these quadrations. And after you've done enough quadrations, it gets back to the very first original order. And so what we know from Cards of the Magi is that there's a very sophisticated sequencing of cards kind of thing. Well, Ra didn't have any interest in that, didn't go into any of that at all. He was just told by the voice, it's incarnation sequencing. These are sequences that were known by the ancient Egyptians. And basically these are just like, they're kind of like misused as a divination tool for mediumship, that actually the real encoded information is the incarnation sequences themselves, which makes sense because later in his incarnation sequencing work, I realize I'm off camera a little bit, sorry, he basically, here we go, I'll just push this back. No, you can be on, we can all, there's enough camera for all of us, we just need to, we didn't really,
Oh no!
Oh no!
okay. Well, I don't know, I think it's still working, I don't know what's happening there. Well, in any case,
So can I say one thing real quick about
please,
the 3 month thing?
Yeah.
So this is funny about the 3 month thing is in the Navajo culture there is, which is then a native culture that's present here in the Southwest. They tend to do a celebration of the baby's first laugh more than the baby's being born, and oftentimes it happens around 3 months. So
really? The baby's first laugh is at 3 months.
So just thinking about that is
well, there's some cultures that don't name a baby until, well, I think that would probably be like around a week after.
Yeah, but there is but it was just interesting that 3 months, just, I would learn about that recently and I was like, oh, that's really when hearing about 3 months, maybe they're laughing because they finally experienced it all and it all just is a big joke, right?
Can you hear us, Peter?
Uh-huh.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah, we've lost all video.
We have no visual anymore.
Oh, I know how that happened. We were trying to angle the camera and it didn't really work. Well, I guess this is just to say you have all these deep mystical incarnation sequencing things. Like this stuff is kind of lost. Like even the people who study this, it is kind of lost. But not entirely. If you really get into Cards of the Magi, things like that, you can start to study that. Well, Eleanor, Haspel-Portner, she was so interested in the tarot, she wouldn't drop it with Ra, and she asked him for any more information. And he said, okay, well, the voice did say one thing, which is that the major arcana are in the head, the ajna, and the throat. And she cracked the code. And if you go on her website, she's actually published her own connection between which one is the fool or the magician. I don't know. I don't know if the fool has a card, but maybe
it would be
does.
the fourth. It would be Youthful Folly, probably.
Oh, Youthful Folly. Maybe it is. Okay, that's good. Okay, maybe that's an easy one. Youthful Folly. They're starting with the fool, but basically, she's figured out which of the major arcana go to the gates, and really interesting stuff. She's also done a lot of research with the Kabbalistic Tree of Life and the 32 Paths of Truth, or things like that. Also called Types of Intelligence, and she found some really interesting things with that as well, which is that in the Qabalah, 32 is really an important number. And so on the one hand, it's kind of like a connection to our channels where we have 36 channels. We have like a few extra maybe that were added for the nine-centered being, who knows. But on the other hand, the 32 also relates because we have a strong relation to the number of lines, right? If we multiply that by 12, then we actually get 384 lines, which is number of lines. So you can see
there's 32 polarities.
And that as well. The 64. Right, exactly. 32 goes up to the 64. So it's almost like the 32 polarities to the 64 gates, all the way you can kind of get to the 384 lines, and really, really interesting relationships that she's doing research on, and really said, Ra kind of said, well, Yeah, it is. Like, he understood that it was a mixing of these systems, but he had no interest in studying them. His attitude was, if you want to learn Kabbalah, go learn Kabbalah. But he's,
Yeah.
well, she is saying, no, there is value in learning these things. We should actually expand our understanding by asking which of them. So she was saying, look, the 17th path in Kabbalah relates to the 731 channel. And if you read about what that type of intelligence is and that path of truth is, it relates so much to what that 731 leadership of being a logical leader. I had 731 in my either composite or one of them as well. So even though I don't have 731, now the other interesting thing was she looked at what stayed the same for me throughout all of them. Most of them I did not have a defined root. I only have a defined root in my actual body graph. The rest of them I do not have a defined root. However, all of them I had a defined G center and sacral. And so that was interesting too, because that was a personality activation, and the way that she calculates, even the ones with the minutes, she uses in relation to the personality. So if you have a personality channel that's fully personality activated, that will be in all of them. So it really puts an accent on the personality, and it's actually saying, well, maybe the astrologers who ignore the design aren't actually ignoring as much as they think they are, because yes, they are ignoring a very significant part of who you are.
But it's consistent.
But the personality is still such a strong construct that my personality channel versus my design channel vanishes in the rest of them. My personality channel sticks around.
I could see why they wanted to fight now.
Yeah,
why they could have been not getting along. I mean,
sure.
Yeah.
Well, I'm going to try to figure out the screen real quick. Yeah. Any other thoughts? Anything you have to contribute, or
No, I think it's been really cool. I'm glad you went over it. I'm really glad that you dove into that. Actually, I'm interested in the interview, and I'm go back and watch Sean's interview with her too.
Yes, Sean Walbridge. Big thanks to Sean.
Yeah, Sean
Introducing us.
He interviewed her.
He interviewed her as well.
Yeah.
Make sure to check out.
He told me, "Yeah, you might be a manifesting generator." I said, "Nope, I'm already out, bro. You already lost me." I said, and he said, "But you just don't know. You could have been a bad one." I said, "Nope. I'm a projector, and you're not getting me out of this lifestyle now that I'm in it. It's working way too well for me."
Well, one thing that I think is kind of cool about this system, I mean, like I said, just learning about it today, is that some of maybe the more seasoned human design people, it's like learning again for the first. It's getting that like beginner feeling again.
The people are getting bored.
Exactly. This is the new final. Now we can dig in.
Yeah, it's like
some other.
It's kind of like an explorer, right? Like we've explored all of Earth, so then it's like, oh, we can go to space, and everyone's like, let's go to space, like.
Can I let me throw a little loop in here? Let me throw a little 3-5 loop in here. I was checking out her site, and so yeah, you can get an hour reading for $360, and about your spiritual design, and whatever this sounds like, what that spiritual design is. But it's interesting. I looked at I was like, I wonder what her design is, and I had this thought because as I was kind of thinking about this throughout the talk and thinking about some things I've heard before, there's a part of me that's going, it's too much. It's a lot. It's interesting. Like you're saying, if you get the bandwidth for it, if it's correct for you, investigate. It sounds great. And part of me is going, it's, there are so many ways, there are so many spectrums and multidimensional, ends to our design. And so, but I was thinking, I wonder what her design is, and I wonder if she's got a wide open head center. And sure enough, splenic manifester, with a full stream of taste. She's got the full stream of taste with 5818, 4816, and that's her only definition. And everything else is open, in a wide open head center. So just something to always to think about is, what's the design of the people who are doing this? Is she thinking about everything that matters or nothing that matters?
Doesn't matter.
Yeah,
Just a
Well,
little.
no, absolutely. These are
Touche.
well, yeah, and then also it might also offer though another interesting thing is that if somebody in all of these other, I mean, the question to me is like not that this is the only level of analysis, but that there's all sorts of situations. Let's take another example. Not doing any of this level of analysis. Someone wide open, head ajna, grows up, defined head ajna, parents, defined head ajna, siblings, defined head ajna, like everyone in their life. They're the only one without defined head ajna. Completely different experience than someone who grows up without all that head ashna energy, right? And so that's all I'm kind of seeing is that when she's looking, and I see we were just joined by Monique. Hi there. So what we're looking at is the work of Dr. Eleanor Haspel-Portner, who has looked at not only your design date and your dream rave date, your basically dream date of calculation and your personality birth date, but also a few other calculations, like some postnatal calculations as well, and really interesting ones. But then I guess I'm just saying I put it in the same category of kind of these are other parts of you that, yeah, for the analysis of human design, I don't think
Necessary.
looking at all the different body graphs. I mean, it might be really cool though. I mean, for me, especially like I get approached by people who don't really want their. I get approached by people who've been in human design for years and years and years. They don't want a normal kind of analysis. They're not newcomers to human design. They might be really interested because they may already know that they grew up with family members who conditioned them in certain ways, but they might be really curious. And it's not even just these body graphs. I do think these are worth researching and should be researched, but I'm also just interested in seeing what are the transits in the 3 months between design date and birth date? What are the transits in the first 3 months of life?
Right.
Because even just that, which is of course what we're seeing with these snapshots, we're just seeing it at snapshots in the 3 months leading up. And oh, this is awesome. Here we go. Okay. 3-5. All right. And 26-3. Yeah. So, I mean, I'm still obviously going to rely on a human design body graph because I've tested it so much that I kind of know how I can and can't use it. What I don't know yet is how I can and can't use these others.
Right.
Bro,
And that's what I'm curious about.
Look at her Pluto, 33-3 in both. This lady is marked by divinity. You can't talk against anything. God marked her with 33-3 on her Plutos.
Wow.
It's so generational too, though.
Yeah, for sure.
Sure. Wow. Okay.
Sometimes I like to tease Peter spiritually. I feel like because we all have that background. He's like, don't suck my no spiritual shit to me.
Well, this is a really fun convo, and I definitely think opens it up. And
yeah, that's great. This is great.
yeah, and it kind of in the same category as like what was going on in the world when you were born. What were the world events? If you ever looked at the most popular song when you were born, if you ever looked at the most, it's kind of interesting things. Like for me, I have an interesting little bit of trivia tidbit. I was born in Malden General Hospital in Massachusetts, in kind of northern part of Boston, just north of the river there. And that hospital, right after I was born in 1983, that hospital shut down. And then for a number of years, it was occupied and filled with vandalism and graffiti. It shut down right after I was born. And then people did like urban spelunking and would take photos of it. And you can find photos in the mid 80s of like these crazy, like almost like Mad Max, post-apocalyptic urban wasteland, hollowed out, hospital. And then they demolished it, they tore it down. Then in the game Fallout, itself a post-apocalyptic game, they made a sequel set, maybe Fallout 3 or 4. They set it in Boston. And they actually had Malden Hospital as one of the locations,
wow.
and it is all torn out with you get to like play it with like mutated, raiders and stuff. So that's where I was born. But thank you for pulling up this body graph. Very interesting, and interesting to see the 3-5, a true scientist, a true experimental scientist.
Super logical, experimental, and I mean, a manifester on the cross of rulership. Yeah.
I have her. So there's a nickname, a quote unquote hotspot that Alokanaz Diaz uses. Hers isn't so hot, but it's decently hot. She has a hotspot in the 11-12. That's a hotspot is a polarity that leads to definition. And so she gets a defined solar plexus Actually, it is pretty hot. She gets a defined solar plexus and she gets a defined ajna from that polarity. I happen to have that polarity, interestingly. But that's another interesting kind of layer. It's like all of these are kind of like, yeah, I have an undefined head ajna too, so it's kind of like, do I need them? No. But weirdly, I will sometimes be learning a technique right when somebody comes to me for a human design reading where that technique happens to fit their approach. And then I don't even use it again. I'm kind of like, did I just learn this
Just for that.
just to teach you to like speak your vocabulary somehow? And I don't even use this anymore. So I just think it's another tool in the tool set, just like the polarities, like to be able to look at that. Yeah. Are you looking at, okay.
Well, three of her four incarnation cross gates are in open centers too.
Yeah.
So kind of like you're saying, it is a hot spot where you're attracted to what you're not. You're attracted to the opposite.
Yeah, and especially that 11-12 polarity hotspot, because so the polarities are like, I have a polarity, the 2247 polarity for me that she has, that's a hotspot in my body graph. I have a lot of people on that as well, because that particular polarity activates temporarily 4 centers for me. I have hanging 12 and I have hanging 64, undefined head ajna, and undefined throat and undefined solar plexus. So if her and I are in aura, I bring her 3 centers and she brings me 4 centers through electromagnetic. That's what a hot spot is. So that's another cool way to kind of analyze, like, these might also be people who I kind of think if there's an overall theme here, it's the question of why do I have a certain relationship to a certain gate that might not be apparent just from looking at my body graph.
Right.
That's
Well,
it.
maybe
That's
Yeah,
the big thing. I
yeah.
took away
maybe
from
you
it
grew
too.
up with
Yeah.
a family member who had it. Maybe you have a partner who had it. Maybe it's in one of these other layers
Yeah.
that we just don't fully understand yet, and it might not be so relevant. But it could be relevant if it's in every single one of these layers.
Like you said, if it's on the personality side and it's in all these, then
Well, yeah, but if it's on the personality, they will already have it.
oh,
So these are like
sorry,
secret
they'll
ones.
already
Something
have
that shows
are
up in the other ones.
This is one that like something that shows up that's not part of the
okay.
personality construct that we don't necessarily know. But
Good
yeah,
stuff.
this is
You know what?
yeah.
What there's different ways to look at that because look at where there's something that I call it's not bridging a split, but there's like a pressure there. Like for example, 26, 45. Here's your 26. Here's your 45. So there's going to be all this pressure on the 21 too. To almost want to bridge this. It's not a split, but it's kind of like an incarnation cross split. I have the same thing where I have the 59 and the 55 in an open solar plexus. There's all this pressure on the 6, So I attract a lot of Edens too, with or is it Maya? I forget. 636.
Those are the Edens there because that 636 polarity cross of Eden, which also has the 1211. But yeah, you can see that like you if somebody is a cross of Eden and you and I are hanging out with them, you and me have a strong connection through this person because my 1211 is such a hot spot for me that and not just 1211, it's that I also have hanging 64, so the opposite of 22, 47. And then I have hanging 11. So it's basically like, but the way it works, I guess, is if I meet a 2247, I immediately get 4 centers. No matter what their centers are, I immediately get solar plexus, throat, head, ajna. And that's a pretty, that's like as hot as it gets because I have those 4, undefined. And then in your case, because you have a defined sacral, for instance, it's going to be a little less hot, but it's still hot. It's basically like that. That's like one kind of way to look at it. So yeah, I just think all these different layers, like, yeah, absolutely. Undefined head ajna. I'm not going to make anyone do the labor of thinking about this stuff, nor am I going to labor to solve it. What I do is kind of notice different approaches, different ways. It's almost like different ways you can get things out of the human design system, the way Steve Rhodes was able to get things out of tone that I didn't know he could get out of it. And then it's like, well, do you give this to the person coming to human design? Probably not. But maybe because the kind of people that come to me mostly are not total beginner newcomers. They're mostly people who are like, I've been studying human design for a long time. I really want to learn something new. Can you tell me something new about my substructure?
Mhm.
I've already learned all of the substructure stuff. I've already learned all of Steve Rhodes.
That's when I hit you up.
Well,
with
maybe
the
Like it's kind of
substructure.
like, can you give me anything?
Maybe it's something like as like an analyst, like you could hold in your back pocket. Like if they come to you with like a question or a problem and they're asking for you for like a human design kind of like response or interpretation on it, then you can have these other charts kind of in your back pocket to see if there is something in there that would explain what's going on in the front, if nothing else had already. You know, it could be something like if you get into this, like that's just an alternative tool.
Yeah, I mean, and also for me, I'm a desire person, so I'm really all about locking into the outcome. And so for me, a lot of times people are coming to me with all these questions, and I would say, if I think that that person is asking those questions in a way that is not important, I mean, I don't want to ever diminish somebody's curiosity, but I'll tell people, I'll say, there was kind of one client who ended up becoming one of the most popular posters on Reddit, and it was so funny. How's this for funny? I had a client, very brilliant, very smart, looking to me for answers. And I'm basically saying, you're the one who's going to come up with these answers because you're the one who has these questions, because these are not questions I would ever come up with in a million years. And you're the one who's smart enough to actually come up with meaningful answers here. You're basically coming to me with your thesis. It's like, this is your like research project.
Mental
And
projector.
I don't even really want to charge in that case. I want to just say, it's cool that you have that. If I'm available, if I'm, I will definitely look at your research. I love sharing research with other human design professionals, whatever. But this was somebody who kind of came under the auspices of a reading and then had a lot of questions very specifically related to their research. Well, a couple months go by and there's this post on the human design Reddit. And I don't really spend a lot of time on there, but Mike does, and he sends them to me. And it ended up becoming one of the top posts of all time. It's all about Magic Square and all this really, really cool, interesting stuff, especially for an undefined head ajna. It's like just endless curiosities of like how these things could relate together and all this stuff. And I'm like, oh my God, this is so up this person's alley. So I send it to my client. And I'm like, you got to read this. Turns out it was him.
Yeah.
I actually invited him to come talk at HDHD. So I do hope at some point he will. But in any case, it's like people have their research project, they have their thing they're into. So it's not necessarily that, this is Eleanor Haspel-Portner's thing, not necessarily going to become my thing.
Right.
That being said, I will hear what she has to say. And from our conversation earlier, I was very impressed. And my key takeaways were really just, we all have relationships to all 64 gates. So it's worthwhile to just develop your relationship, even if you don't necessarily have a reason to, like somebody in your life had that gate, or like you don't really need a reason to develop a relationship to a gate. You can just kind of ask yourself, what is your relationship to creativity? What is your relationship to, besides just saying not self, it's not me.
Yeah.
Right? There it can also,
I love that.
Yeah, there could be. So that was one of the takeaways. And then the other one was, there's another interesting one too. She was showing me the variance, and she was really showing me how basically she was saying that when things are activated, I will have certain almost conditioned or imprinted responses. And that's what reminded me of, okay, yeah, if you grew up with a parent who had that channel and then you meet someone with that channel, and it just brings out this conditioned response to that chemistry, like your brain creates that chemistry that you used to have with them. Maybe it was a splenic thing and you're just immediately bonded and you can't let go of them because you just feel that, or maybe it was an ego thing and you feel threatened, or who knows what. But that part of it, I was like, okay, that definitely makes sense. And then just to your point, Peter, I really liked what Ross said. Whenever he'd go into transits, he'd say, if you'd actually try to analyze all the things that happen in a day, it would take more than a day to do it. So you're in the problem of transits that you can never catch up to the amount of information you would need to be able to actually see everything that happened. So all you're really doing is just kind of doing these brushes. And so in a way, the way I see this is that if it's easy and convenient, why not have a few extra body graphs? I mean, at least for myself, I don't think I'll be running them for everybody, but just to kind of see, can we determine something meaningful, or can we have a meaningful little micro report? Can I add something to the signpost dashboard that will just say, by the way, your integration has a defined ego, even though you don't. Just so you know, like there was a lot of ego activation in the months after you were born, and 3 of the 4 body graphs we generated using these multidimensional times had the defined ego or something like, interesting.
Did you say that you can actually run some of these charts through neutrinos through Windows?
Neutrinos for Windows has a plugin, and I don't know how readily available it is, but I do know that that plugin exists. You can also get them generated for free, but I know it would be nice to generate a lot of them and just to kind of, especially if you're going to do research. But I would just say, if you're interested in pursuing any of this, and if you're really feeling called to research and dig into something new, reach out, because Dr. Haspel-Portner is an incredibly generous person with her time and energy, and seemed like a really, really astute scholarly researcher. That was my impression. I felt really kind of flashback to my online college days where I'd be Zooming with different professors and so on.
A lot of her texts are floating around out there. I was just looking. I have 2 or 3 on my computer here, and I'm sure there's
She's a lot available online. If you go on her website too, you can find some cool things on there, and I think she'll be having more. So yeah, well, this has been kind of a fun one. Maybe just we can kind of start to wrap up, but just if anybody has anything they want to talk about, or just a little more on the frivolous side, we have a week ahead of us of HDHD Spring Fling, which I apologize for not better advertising, getting people to come. But those of us who are here we have a few things that we're having fun.
Good brunch already.
We had quiches this morning. We had a veggie quiche and then a chicken quiche. Smoked chicken was interesting for the meat eaters.
The beet hummus.
The beet hummus was really good. Yeah, Rachel's been crushing it in the kitchen.
Yeah.
Krista brought Rice Krispie treats and gluten-free.
I don't know if you heard this, but they were made with peeps. That's why they're purple.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I guess the peeps melted all the time, and they're tasty. And I mean, we've just been having a really good time. What else? Oh, Johnny has these super taster testers, so we're going to be testing who's a super taster or not. I have taste cognition, so I thought I might be a super taster. I'm not, but we will see. Even though I'm not, though, I could tell something was on the ones. Like I could tell they weren't the control. I just couldn't describe. I almost like if I kept trying, maybe I would get it, but I was also kind of grossed out by it because they're like weird tastes that they test you with. So I didn't really want to taste it. So part of it is like, I don't know if it was my cringe response, but it turns out Rachel is a super taster, and so is Johnny.
Oh, cool.
And we think James is a super taster as well, which he's like, well, this makes perfect sense. This is why I have such a, not this James. We'll find out. You might be a super taster as well, but James Alexander, he's like, this makes perfect sense. This is why I can only go to these nice restaurants. He's like, see, Jonah, that place wasn't very good. So whole thing now. But yeah, we have some fun stuff planned this week. And then Richard and Randy are in town, and we're gonna go probably he got to do a kayak, so or a fun yak, they're called. He's gonna take people on these fun yaks on the river. So yeah, really, really fun time, and wish you all were here, but it's still fun to catch up and chat and have a little video. So
keep us, let us know any key moments that you want to share.
Yeah, I'll take little videos for sure. And then I've also been showing some new content, which will be available on Signpost very soon. I've been doing a few series that are just pre-recorded. And so some of them are like class materials and more educational and serious, but then to kind of blow off steam, I have one that's called Wacky World that Von Paul came up with the name, and Wacky World is like 8-minute episodes, and they just it's this little variety show. And we have some really fun stuff. I actually interviewed my mom's neighbor who knew Ra back in the 90s here in Santa Fe. And he would be at the Santa Fe flea market with a little hat, dressed in black, selling tapes and cassettes and CDs. And so I have a whole 8-minute interview. That's one episode. And then I have another episode. I have different little topics for each episode. I'm up to 7 episodes now. And when I hit 10 or 12, I'm going to put them all on Signpost.
It's going to take
this guy at the flea market. I met this crazy guy at the flea market. He was
right.
Oh my gosh.
Changed my life.
Well, he told her to move to Taos, and she actually did. And she had her kids in Taos because of Ra's urging. And it wasn't necessarily because of anything in her body graph. He just thought she'd be a Taos person. He really liked Taos a lot more than Santa Fe. I think he saw Santa Fe as kind of uptight art snobs, and he liked is more of the Taos community. That's the impression I got.
Taos in the 90s was pretty freaky.
Yeah.
Well, so was Santa Fe, from what I've heard. I mean, I've heard stories, but yeah, I bet Taos is it's just a little more wild up there. And I think Ra with his integration circuitry likes the survivalist wild thing. Get out to Taos Mesa, and it's really its own world. And there's not a lot of it's kind of lawless out there, or they just look after themselves.
Yeah.
Yep.
Cool.
All right, guys.
Great chat.
And I should
Peter, it's good to see you.
Yes.
do my best to get back online with my regularly scheduled program one way or
I
another.
can't wait. I love what you did. Yeah, I was loving it. I've like one more for sure.
All right. Yeah, I've been if there's any comedians that you're wanting to dive into, then it's a little less of a selection than rock stars, you know.
Oh,
I like
Cat Williams.
Cat Williams.
Oh, Cat Williams for sure. Dave Chappelle.
Classic.
I'd say Bill Hicks. I really like.
Oh, Bill Hicks would be tight. Yeah.
I think he's a
Sam Kinison.
Oh,
Check out Sam Kinison.
pretty angry guy.
Open throat, anybody?
Yeah.
Sam Kinison and Bill Hicks came up in the same club. Listen to them side by side, and they sound exactly alike.
No, they do. They
blew me
do.
away. I love Sam Kinison.
Me too.
When I heard it's Bill Hicks, I was like, "It's Sam Kinison," and then they're on the same bill together.
Well,
of course they were.
Well, and now you're talking about all these people who have died. Sam Kinison.
Yeah. Well, Cat Williams still alive. Dave Chappelle's still alive.
Yeah.
Mitch Hedberg.
Bill Burr. Bill Burr's alive, but say Bill Burr. You could do Bill Burr. Who's up there? Stavos. You gotta do that Stavos guy. Have you guys seen this Greek guy, Stavos? The heavyset guy on YouTube?
Okay, here's just a really quick Mitch Hedberg. They say the belt holds up the pants, but the belt hoops hold up the belt. So who's the real hero here? Come on. This is some undefined head Hosh. Or maybe he had a defined head Hosh.
I love me a good one-liner.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Adam Sandler, that'd be good. Bo Burnham. All right, Marissa.
Oh, Bo Burnham, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's a genius. Oh, man.
Maybe we can do some comedians next time. And I'd love to.
All right, that's the next on the list was the gurus, rock stars, and comedians. So
Nice.
thank you guys. That's all I needed for the inspiration.
Thank you, Peter. Really good
Sounds
to see
good.
you.
Yeah.
Really good.
Thank you, everybody, tuning in.
Yes.
Thank
All right, guys.
Yeah, me.
You.
Yeah.
We did it.